We are joined today by the psychotherapist and author and spiritual teacher and musician Thomas More, who wrote a very well-known book called The Care of the Soul, and also a book which I've worked through several times, Dark Nights of the Soul, which has been a big help for me in my life. And Thomas, I'd just really like to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you, Mick. I'm very happy to be with you today.
It was a bit of a surprise, actually, that you wrote back and said you'd like to come on, and a real honor for me to get the chance to talk to you. So, welcome.
I think it's important to say yes to invitations of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I'm trying to say yes to them as well. It's not always pleasant where life invites you to go.
No, no.
Hopefully, this will be okay today. So, I've noticed in lots of the interviews you've done on podcasts, you start with talking about Care of the Soul. It's the book that I suppose you're most well known for. And so maybe we could just start there just briefly. If people want to know more about your background, there's lots of videos out there about that. So I thought maybe if we just started with this concept that you have of care of the soul and what that is and where that comes from.
It's a very ancient idea. It goes back to, pre-Christian times, this phrase, care of the soul. So I borrowed it. I remember when I was first thinking of using it, I thought of it as a replacement for psychology, that it would be better to talk about care of the soul. I mean, the word psychology has psyche in it, and that's the Greek word for soul. So it's not going too far to say care of the soul. In fact, the word psychotherapy literally in Greek means care of the soul. Psyche and therapia means to care for. And so that's important to me, where we're not out to fix ourselves or have an improved version of ourselves, but rather to have an ongoing, rather calm and easygoing care, daily care of the soul, instead of trying to aim at perfection or health or anything like that.
Well, it's an ancient idea, but it's also a kind of a radical idea in psychotherapeutic circles or psychology circles, because often the idea is that we want to go along to these sessions and be cured, be fixed.
Well, cure is not a terrible word. It's like I used to say, it's like curing tobacco. You cure things, you hang them up to dry and get their flavor come out. And so that kind of curing or curating is a nice way of looking at it. We curate the soul. Artists curate by setting up displays of paintings so that people can enjoy them. So I think all these words are not too bad. I just don't want to be in the modern frame of mind where we think that we have standards of health that we each have to match. I think it's so important in caring for the soul to allow the individual to come forward and to allow ourselves to be more individuals than to fit some standard of what's correct and healthy.
And I think that's something that it often gets sort of left out or not mentioned so much in some spiritual circles is this, even the concept of the soul. I mean, it's difficult to have a concept of the soul. Maybe we can talk about that in a moment. But often in spiritual movements or in spiritual circles, there's this almost disdain for the personal troubles of what's going on in each individual soul. And it made me think of a phrase, I don't know if I took it from you, but sort of the danger of a spirituality without soul. Could you say something to that point?
It's a very big topic. So first of all, I follow, an old ancient tradition in which soul and spirit are two different things. They're both equally important, and it's very important to have them linked together. But nevertheless, they are distinct and separate. So spirit is that element in us that moves us to be toward perfection, to perfect ourselves and to move into a future. A future is important to the spirit, and to follow rules and have an authority, and maybe to be part of a tradition. All of that is part of the spirit realm. Soul is quite different because soul is more interested in things like home and family and good food and cozy life and being with friends and being interested in telling stories of the past. All of that is very soul oriented. And you can see it's very different from the spirit, but both are really important. Excuse me, my voice is going. Let me try it. So they're both important, but they're very different. And so let's say if you are involved in some spiritual practice, like some very detailed practice of meditating, or if you are on a certain kind of diet or fast, it's very important at the same time to be soulful, to care for your soul. So even though you might be meditating, you want to have maybe a good lunch, or to have friends around and not just be alone and doing things on yourself and perfecting yourself, but enjoying people, enjoying your place, enjoying your house, being connected to your friends and family, cooking, all of these things that are more of the soul. If you have both of these going on at the same time, I think you're in good shape. But there's a tendency to move into the spirit and to see the qualities of soul as an obstacle to the spirit. And you try to tame those things. I know when I was a monk when I was a young man, and I left home when I was 13 to join this monastic life and to study to be a Catholic priest. And I'm glad that I did that. It really gave me my life. It was very important for me. But at the same time, I still feel I'm going to be 85 next week. I still feel after all of this time, I feel some regret for leaving my family at such an early age because family is so important to the soul. So I think that what I did was sacrifice that important soul element in order to move ahead in the spirit. As I say, I think it was a good choice, but it was at a great sacrifice. And I still feel the pangs of having left my family. So there's soul and spirit.
Yeah, I can relate to that in some ways. It's not as extreme. I wasn't 13, but I went to a seminary in later life. But in order to do it, I left my home country where my family were, my grandparents, parents, brothers and sisters, etc. And hearing you speak just now, I realized, I realized quite a long time ago, but this just reminded me that I held spirit as the ultimate thing. And I think that what it did, it was the concepts and ideas and the striving was all good. It's not necessarily a negative thing, but in some ways it was an escape, or it could become an escape at times where I'm actually trying. it's almost like trying to get away from the earth. All these things, like you say, cooking, family, the sort of the messy stuff. It's nice, it's warm, but it's messy. And there's a part of me that really found it too messy and wanted to get away from it. And so I think, as you get older, you learn these things, that it's important to have a balance between the both, and the body as well, of course.
Yes, body, soul, and spirit. All three. That's the tradition that I follow from way back in time, that we consist of body, soul, and spirit. And all three of these things require our care, and in a certain way, an integration of the three, or at least having them in relation to each other.
That's something that Robert Sardello also talks quite a bit about. And I know that I think you and Robert worked together in the past, if I'm right.
Yes, we're all friends. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's because this channel we often talking about Rudolf Steiner's work, and he's comes out of that tradition as well. And he's often talking about this, yeah, the integrating this integration of body, soul, and spirit. And they are separate, and they are unique aspects of a human being and the world, but they're also in constant dialogue with one another.
Yes, exactly.
So something else oh, sorry, Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me. I just wanted to point out that I really appreciated what you just said about escape, that it's possible. It's not always the case at all, but it's possible. One of the dangers in the spiritual life is to be escaping from other aspects of life. There can be an escape element in the spiritual life. That's just one of many dangers in it. And what I've done in my work is try to point out both the positive sides of a spiritual life. I mean, I'm a very spiritual person, and I have been all my life, and I like being identified publicly as someone who represents the spiritual life. I appreciate that very much. But at the same time, I think I'm in a position to say there are dangers in the spiritual life, and one of them is to escape. And I think what we have to do when we're practicing actively and intensely some spiritual way, some path, we really should ask ourselves, and honestly ask ourselves and inquire, is there something escapist in what I'm doing? And it's worth asking and exploring that to actually improve your spirituality. It's not a negative thing about the spirit. It's just trying to notice potential dangers in that kind of practice.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. Always tried to see it that if I was, if I'm practicing meditation or deep in prayer or something, that I'm opening myself up to something, or almost like I'm going somewhere to gather things, or to gather something to bring back into the soul life and back into the material
Yes.
world, is how I've tried to think about it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, that's a nice way to look at it, I think. Very good. You bring it back into the world that you inhabit, your body, your family, your friends, and so on, your home. Those are all important elements of the soul, life of the soul.
I think what also must have helped me along the way there was that I always had music. So I always had a way to express it in the soul realm. I wasn't just floating off into bliss land.
Yes. I just, I had a half hour free before meeting with you just now, and I played the piano in that time. I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, I think I'll play the piano. And that gives so much to me to be able to do that.
What did you play?
Oh, I played a couple of things. I played a little jazzy version of Amazing Grace. That's where I started with. And then I played a piece by Bach, one of his, from the Well-Tempered Clavier of Bach, a fugue, much more difficult in some ways than Amazing Grace.
Beautiful. Yeah, and you mentioned in the Dark Night of the Soul, you're actually talking about Glenn Gould a little bit about his, and he was a great
Yeah.
proponent of playing Bach, wasn't he? In a very unique way.
Oh, yeah.
About
Great, great hero of mine. Yes.
wonderful. Yeah.
I saw him perform when I was 17 years old. My father took me. I was living in Detroit, Michigan, and Glenn Gould was in Toronto, which is not far away. And he was performing in those days. He stopped performing shortly after that. And my father and I sat there and watched him perform. And it was one of the most thrilling times of my life. And I was only 17, but I was already introduced to music so that I could appreciate what he was doing and how wonderfully he presented himself and how he played.
So you just caught him just before he stopped playing live.
I
Oh,
did.
wow. Amazing.
Great gift from my father to do that for me. I wouldn't have known that he was doing that. And then my father, who tended to be a little bit of a cheapskate, I think we call them, not, he didn't spend money too easily. And he got us these front row seats for Glenn Gould. And it was a great thrilling moment of my life.
Those are real soul experiences, aren't they? When something happens, like a parent gives a gift like that. I just remembered this story about the woman who just passed away who lived with the chimpanzees,
Jane Goodall.
Jane Goodall. That's right. Thank you. Yeah, she just passed away. She tells this amazing story about when she was a child, and she went missing, and her parents searched high and low all day and actually all night. She was missing overnight as well, so that you can imagine the state that her parents were in. And she walked back in the morning into the house, and the most important part of the story really is that the parents didn't get angry at her immediately or reprimand her or anything, but she'd actually stayed out overnight in the with the chickens because she wanted to see where the eggs came from, and she waited and saw where the eggs came from, and then she came back inside and excitedly told the parents. And yeah, they didn't tell her off. She didn't get in trouble. She wasn't reprimanded. And that experience, in some ways, led her to go on to do the work that she did. But I just thought about, there's those moments with a little child where one wrong move, like wrong move, you know what I mean, that could crush their soul, but yet the parents left this space. And so I guess in a way you could say her soul expanded and led her to her destiny.
A wonderful story. I had an opportunity very briefly to meet her a number of years ago through Satish Kumar, who's an old friend of mine who used to put on quite a number of events in London, and we met there. And one of the things that struck me, the reason I'm mentioning this today is to honor her on her death. What struck me about her was that she was such a sensitive, frail kind of person. She was thin and small but had such a big heart and imagination and courage, such great courage, and to do the work she did for the earth, to do so much and to achieve so much. That really inspired me just to meet her and to see what she was like, to see that she, you don't have to be a huge, booming person to accomplish a lot in your life. You can be someone who is extremely sensitive and maybe not really robust and yet able to achieve a great deal. That was one of the lessons I learned just from being in her presence.
Maybe that leads into this other question I had for you about this concept of the daimon, or living a daimonic life. And I, just to be clear, we're not talking about demonic life, but daimonic. And you talk about this in The Dark Nights of the Soul. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit? What does this word mean? It's a Greek word, and what we're talking about.
I'm going to have to be a little professor for a moment to do that.
Please do.
So the Greeks, in the Iliad, for example, one of the earliest of the great poems of the Greeks, the Iliad, they use the word daimon. And what it means is a god, one of the gods or great spirits, who doesn't have a proper name. The daimon is not named, like Zeus or Aphrodite or anything like that. Just the daimon. And the daimon is a guiding power, a guiding force that can be part of your world, part of your ambit, part of, I don't want to say in you because it's not exactly right, although sometimes we experience the daimon as a force within us. It's also outside of us. It's both, in and out. We might encounter our own daimon in somebody else who guides us forcefully. There's force with the daimon. That's the thing about it. It's not just a presence, a kind presence that guides us. It's a force, it's a power. And part of the power that we need in life to get along in life comes to us outside of ourselves. It's not really part of our ego life. It's not part of our self so much. It's a power that we can feel either within us or near us that is giving us the courage and the forcefulness we need to make the next step in life. And in a way, then we have to obey the daimon. When the daimon appears, we have to agree to let it guide us and move us along. Sometimes a daimon is very, very slight. For example, I frequently have the experience, as I think most people do, I might leave the house to go somewhere. And I get into my car and I think to myself, I have forgotten something. And so I could ignore that sensation that I've forgotten something, but most of the time I will go back into the house to see if I've forgotten something. That is a very minor, very tiny experience of the daimon. It comes that way, like an awareness that you can either accept or ignore. But sometimes the daimon is powerful. Now, when I was 13 years old, I was seized by this tremendous desire to be a Catholic priest. And my parents wisely suggested I wait 5 years or, before I got older to go. It was a very wise thought on their part, but I was seized by this desire. I think that was a daimon moving me into my future. And I said yes to it. But I couldn't say no. I didn't feel I had the strength to say no. It was so big. So sometimes the daimon is overpowering. And sometimes it's the slightest sensation that maybe you need to go back into your house. You see what I mean? No matter how big it is or small it is, it can be a force that can guide us. And it doesn't mean that every time we hear or sense that kind of a presence, that it's going to be important to us. And so sometimes you might follow it and discover, well, that's not really important to me. At other times, it becomes absolutely crucial. Like my decision to leave home at that time was crucial to me. I wouldn't be talking to you today if I hadn't done that. I wouldn't have done any. I don't know what I would have done with my life, but I know I couldn't do what I'm doing now if I hadn't left home. I entered a bigger world, and I didn't know that I was so hungry for an intellectual life that I got. by leaving home. I wouldn't have had it. I came from a family of plumbers, wonderful people, very creative and intelligent people. But plumbers don't have the same life that I have now, you know. So I might have become a plumber. My father, I know, would have liked me to become one, which would have been great. But I wouldn't have the life I have now if I had not followed that daimonic presence. So I recommend giving the daimon a try whenever it appears and develop the talent and the habit of paying attention to those forces and those inclinations that come to move us somewhere, and not be discouraged when they don't lead anywhere, because they don't always lead to a creative place. But if you stick with them, they will take you where you want to go in your life.
What other ways might the daimon manifest in someone's life?
Uh, what other ways did you say?
Yeah, what other ways might they enter our lives?
Well, one way, I think you could say that, you know, the Socrates in the early Greek philosophy says that love is a daimon. That he uses the word daimon. He says love is a daimon. This is in Plato's wonderful piece of writing called the Symposium. And he says, Socrates there says that love is the daimon. So I think that when you love something, when you fall in love, I think we understand how daimonic that experience is. Daimonic, not demonic, as you pointed out. Daimonic, meaning that it is one of these forces that can lead us into our life. And so I think the force of loving, falling in love with someone, can be overwhelming, and you can't fight it. You can try, but you can't very often. And you give it a try, and it doesn't always work out. And I don't think it has to work out all the time. Maybe some of the times we fall in love with someone is important in the overall development of our capacity to love. It's important to have different loves in our life and to have some that don't turn into a lifelong relationship. Those things are important. It doesn't mean they're not daimonic. They are. We feel the force of them, and they're difficult to resist. We can resist them. We can say no. But I think it's usually better to say yes and then be smart about it. Use your intelligence so that you make the right decision.
Is it kind of like a destiny, something like a destiny force that's leading you in a
There
particular
can
direction?
be there can be a destiny aspect to daimon for sure. That daimon can be leading you into your destiny for sure. But I think sometimes it's not so much destiny. It might be. I feel it when it comes to writing a new book. I, I feel really driven to work at something that maybe I don't think is going to be a good idea, and yet I feel driven. And so I have to decide, am I going to follow this drivenness, this invitation? I don't think that's destiny. There may be some destiny in it because it's about my work, but I think it's more the creative aspect of life, that our creativity can be daimonic. And you can decide to live your life daimonically, that the daimon is going to guide you. You're going to follow it rather than your own mind and your own mental judgments about things. You follow the daimonic presence. You can live that way, and you can go from one thing to the next, one stage of your life to the next by following your daimon.
So more so than, the modern concept with, like with coaching, etc., is, you choose, goal setting, you choose exactly where you want to go, and then you head in that direction step by step, and watch out whoever comes in my way. It's a very different way of approaching it.
No, that's far too rational. No, you can't get anywhere that way, really. You can't get far enough anyway, because the thing is, at least I think I feel very strongly, and there's a long, long tradition, ancient tradition to this, all the way through time, that the way to really get to where you can be creative and where you really want to be in your life ultimately is to follow, not to take the lead, to follow. And what do you follow? Not somebody else. You don't do what somebody else tells you to do. You follow your own inner promptings, and or your own promptings that come to you even from outside. I have been directed in my life by certain people. I'll give you an example. When I first went to university, I loved it. I loved university so much. And I immediately thought how wonderful it would be to become a professor in my life, that would be the best thing for me to do. It really seemed to suit me very well. And eventually I got a PhD in religious studies, and I got a position at a university to teach religious studies. I usually put the spiritual and the psychological together, and that's what I was teaching. And I was doing well, and I absolutely loved it. I thought I would, and I did. I loved teaching. And one day, thinking I would be spending the rest of my life doing this, one day the head of my department, who was a friend of mine, asked me to come see him. And he said to me that the faculty of that department had decided not to give me tenure, which meant they don't want me anymore. I have to leave. And it's not easy, I felt. I'm not sure if it's true, but I don't think it's too easy to get another job when you've been denied tenure at a university. So in that few seconds when he told me that, which was an absolute shock to me because I didn't expect it. I thought I was doing a wonderful job and I love the work. But, my interests, I understand, are not what a university probably would be supporting. The things I'm interested in are a little outside the university interests, I think. So I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. And in those seconds, I remember thinking to myself, this is a great revelation to me. I wasn't expecting. In those few seconds, I thought, what am I going to do now? What will I do next? My life is now in a new track altogether. And I've got to figure this out. And I'm loose. I'm just floating right now. And I left that conversation with him full of anxiety, not knowing what I would do next. But that was a daimonic moment for me. And even though what he was telling me was not a voice from or a presence within me, it was somebody else, I feel that his message was the Daimon speaking through him to me at that moment. So that's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes this daimonic message comes from other people. Someone else's voice is the voice of the daimon. And I felt that very strongly at that time.
And so sometimes it's a message you don't really want to hear, or it's something that's sending you in a direction that you don't know where it's headed.
You don't know, it's the last thing you want to hear. And it puts you in a position of anxiety, I think, because you don't know what's next.
And then you mentioned quite a few times in the Dark Nights of the Soul book about humor, and especially irony, and how important that can be. And I guess in darker moments, as well. And you mentioned this great example of Brian Keenan. I haven't actually read his book yet, but he was captive in Beirut and developed this incredible strength and ability to find humor in things. But maybe you could just talk about that if you feel you can, about the importance of humor and particularly irony in the spiritual life in dark times.
Well, humor and irony go together to some extent. They're not always together, but often. So you laugh at something because you've turned some great value inside out, and so you can laugh at it. My old friend James Hillman, who died over 10 years ago now, he and I were friends for almost 40 years. And he was a great intellectual and had studied all the great universities in Europe. And we had a great time. We loved to talk, have conversations about things. But the one thing notable about our conversations is that we laughed all the time. We saw humor everywhere. And a lot of times it was the irony that we were laughing at, that things were inside out. And that was what was so funny. We would laugh, for example, if we saw that something that was supposed to be revered was actually should not be revered, or we wouldn't revere. There were a lot of things that people assumed were important that we didn't. And we would laugh when we discussed it. For example, we were very interested in the Greek god Hermes. Hillman wrote a great deal about the Greek gods as powers in life, images for the powers of life. And Hermes was one of these great powers. He was known as the thief. And there's a power in life that steals things from us, takes things away from us. You lose a job. I lost my job at the university. That was the work of Hermes, I felt. Life steals things from you. And in that case, what happened, to finish that story, if I hadn't lost the job at the university, I would never have had this life as a writer. I've had a life of connection with the entire world. I mean, even these days, I am doing interviews with people all over the world. We're doing this today. You're in the UK and I'm here in New Hampshire in the United States. I just had an interview with Bulgaria recently and with Estonia. And these countries that I have to look on the map to figure out where they are. I mean, and they tell me when they begin talking to me that their people are reading my books. And I can't fathom that these people in these countries that I don't know well are reading my books. They wouldn't be reading my books, I think, if I hadn't been fired from that job. So you see, there's a great deal of irony in that experience. I felt horrible losing my job as a professor, but it gave me my life. Losing that job gave me my life, gave me my life work, gave me a life that I never could have imagined. A tremendous opening to the world, and it's given me so much. So there's a big irony there that came through the Daimon in a way. It came through. And if I've done this, if I were to say one thing, and I don't mean it that I'm proud of it, it's just I do it, that all my life I have said yes to the invitations, even if they were difficult and painful. I have said yes. I said yes to going off to study for the priesthood, leaving home. It was so difficult to leave home. I had a wonderful family. It was so hard. I still suffer it all these years later. But I did that. And I when I entered the monastery and loved it, and for the most part, I had a lot of absolutely highly neurotic leaders in that life. I mean, they were crazy, maybe psychotic. And so it was not easy all the time, but I loved it nevertheless in general. But there came a moment 13 years later, when I realized that it was over, that this life of this monastic life was great while I had it, but I realized, I can't do this anymore. It's not right. I was now being moved into something else. And that's the way I've lived. I said yes to that. And it meant really disappointing my parents who suffered my absence all those years. And at the very end of it all, I said, well, I'm not going to go through with it. And they were thinking, well, at least he'll become a priest at the end of this, but I didn't. So all of it was difficult, I think, saying yes. The daimonic life I found to be a challenge. It was painful and difficult many, many times. But overall, it gave me my life. So I think in the long run, see, it's full of ironies. And even though there's a lot of humor in it, uh, I know if I told that story to Hillman, we'd both be laughing about it because what a stupid kid, that thought I'd be on something the rest of my life. I didn't realize that these things don't last forever. But humor and irony are essential to it. And if you don't see the irony in it, eventually you'll be so destroyed by it that it'll be hard to have your happiness.
It's just having you say that because I went to a seminary. I studied for several years, moved my whole family to the other side of the world to do it, and then didn't become a priest. So I can relate. And you look at it from the outside and you think, oh wow, yeah, but there's something else. Something else is leading. Something else is guiding things, and it's is it do you think it's about because I noticed you mentioned in there that about the regret. Um, but do you think it's about also trusting something? I don't know what it is exactly that we're trusting, but trusting, some people might say God, or trusting the universe, or trusting the daimon, that it is leading somewhere.
Well, I don't think that's an allowable thing I don't think you're allowed to have that kind of a thought. Um, to me, and here's something, it's a bit subtle. I don't hear people talk about it much, but the idea here is that we have a tendency to want to literalize and actualize these things like the daimon and say it must be God or it must be an angel or must be fate or something. But see, in my realm, in my world, and what I learned mainly from Hillman and other writers that I've been educated by, that these things are part of life and the imagination. I live the life of imagination. So when I talk about the daimon, there's no being somewhere flying through the air that's the daimon, but it's an experienced presence, and it's a figure of the imagination. The daimon was in a way came to the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. They used this word and they described it the way I'm describing it to you. So it's a figure of the imagination that helps us get along in life. But it's not anywhere. It's not a literal thing at all. It's not literal. It's not actual. And what you have to do, and I see this is the way I understand religion. I am a great devotee of religion. I am so happy that I have my PhD in religious studies. I wouldn't want it any other way. But to me, religion is all about the imagination. Uh, I like the statement from one great American poet, Wallace Stevens. He says the final belief is to believe in a fiction, knowing that it is a fiction. And that's been my guideline in my life. So it's a figure of the imagination. And I don't think it's worth our time. We should not ask what is this real? Is this God? Is this something? Is this some presence? No. It's a figure of the imagination that we can live by. And eventually you're going to have to discover in your life, or at least you may discover in your life, that the imagination is everything. And how we develop our imagination determines how we live our life.
So, do you see figures such as Jesus Christ or figures from the Bible or other religious traditions as, when you say they're fictions, do you think they don't have any real existence? So, you know, the idea that the Christ lives after the resurrection, is that something that's not real, or how do you see that?
Well, you can have different points of view. I actually hold several different points of view at once. And I'm very interested in Jesus. I've written several books about Jesus, and I'm very interested. I have many religions, you know. I mean, I've written a piece. I published as an article, but I haven't really published the book that I call Zen Catholic, where I identify myself as a Zen Catholic.
That's great.
So I don't have this kind of a belief system that is unitary, just one religion. I don't think that's appropriate for this time. But I have many views on Jesus, and to me, I can be convinced, and I am in moments, that Jesus never really existed. That he is kind of a figure of the imagination only, that was made up of many traditions and stories. I have very good friends who have written books saying that, and I like their books very much. I'm also very devoted to what a former teacher of mine and friend of mine, John Dominic Crossan, who is a scripture scholar, who has studied the historical Jesus all his life, and who thinks that Jesus was, I think he would call Jesus a revolutionary peasant, is the phrase he uses. And I love Dominic's work tremendously. And I'm so happy that he has spent his life studying the historical Jesus. And I'm happy to say that Jesus could very well have been an historical person. But even if he was, the thing is, his role in the imagination of culture and of people is so strong, so incredibly strong, that he is a factor as a figure of the imagination, whether he is historical or not. The important thing is his role in the imagination. And this may seem sacrilegious, but I would make a comparison. When I visit London, when I go to London, I love being in London. One of the things that always astonishes me is in Baker Street, they have the apartments, the rooms where Sherlock Holmes lived. And people go to see his rooms and to see his hat and to see the pipe he smoked and the violin he played. And, you know, he was a figure of novels. You know, Sherlock Holmes was a figure created in the novels. And yet people will go to his place. I will. I'll go to his rooms and be very happy to see his hat and his pipe. Very happy to see that. So I believe strongly in the reality of the imagination. And I understand it's imaginal. I'm not deluded. I'm not, you know, I think people can be deluded about that. But I think that Jesus, whether he's historical or not, and I keep studying, I'll read everything I can find that's intelligent about that question. I still haven't decided. There are moments when I think that Jesus probably was an alien, who visited from another planet. That makes a great deal of sense to me as well. Um, One of my favorite movies is The Day the Earth Stood Still, where you have this visitor come from another planet to try to save the Earth. I think that's a real Jesus story, and I can understand that. But I think the important thing, even when you get married to this person that came to you daimonically, that person exists so much in your imagination. They're very real, and you have a very real relationship with them for sure, and you interact with that real person. But so much of your relationship is based on your imagination of who that person is. So the role of the imagination is essential in religion and in daily life. We don't talk about that much because we are a fact-based society. Everything is based on evidence. And I think that's a huge, huge mistake.
So it sounds like the phrase I often use for this kind of thing is you keep the question open. You don't decide Jesus is this, Jesus is not that, he's this, he's that, he's that. Because right now, maybe you'll know differently in 10 years' time or after your birthday. But right now, you don't know as such. So you keep the question open, and that's this sort of that's a spiritual practice in itself. Would you say? Is that what you're doing? You're
Yes, it's a philosophy of life. It's something that I have worked out through very strong influences. Carl Jung was a big influence on that approach to me. Hillman was more radical about it than Jung was, I think, to some extent, a little bit more radical. And maybe certainly developed it further. So I was very much influenced by him. You mentioned Robert Sardello. Robert has developed those ideas in his own way, and very close to Hillman. And the three of us, Hillman and Sardello and I, were very close at one point in our lives. And but we're different, very different, have nuances and differences. So yeah, it's interesting how we can come up with a basic philosophy and share it with others, and yet have your own way of looking at it and your own way that changes over time. So when I was a monk, I didn't think that Jesus was a fiction in any way. I just took him as an historical, real figure. And I had a wonderful life as a monk with that philosophy. But I feel that as we grow older, we mature, and our thinking ought to become more subtle. And I feel that my thinking about it through these influences, Jung and Hillman in particular, and people like poets like, the poet I was mentioning, these are all influences that have helped me refine my idea of the role of imagination in life.
I just had a guest on the podcast a few days ago who had written a book about Christianity called Free from Dogma, and it was, in a sense, talking about this way of relating to Christianity as a lived experience rather than as a set of beliefs to adhere to. And it sounds like you're talking about that in a similar way. I guess you still read about Jesus, you still write about him and other religious figures too, I'm sure, but not to then in a way fix them in the imagination, but to allow them their space and their freedom. Is that right? Am I on the right track?
Well, I take them seriously, both in their historicity. I mean, insofar as, if they have that history, it doesn't worry me of whether they do or not. But if, I will certainly be interested in reading biographies of people who have lived and who at the same time are important figures. For example, Jung is a figure in my imagination. I'm not a Jungian. I'm not a devotee of Jung the way many of my friends are. I don't, I have not joined the Jungian fold, but I read Jung constantly and have for many, many, many years, 50 years, I've read Jung. And I'm so excited that there's a new translation of his collected works coming out. I'm just very, very devoted to Jung, but I'm not a follower. I don't belong to his fold. I'm not a Jungian in any way, officially. Many, many of my friends are, but I'm not. I just don't want to be in that kind of an organization where I'm locked into something. So but Jung is a great. In other words, he has a place in my imagination. My worldview, the world I live every day. When I sit down to write a book, the very first thing I do is go into Jung's index of his collected works and look up what I'm writing on and say, what has Jung said about it? And I read everything Jung said first. So he's a very big figure in my imagination. Hillman is incredibly strong, and I've had to work for the past 10 years to not be overly influenced by him. And I've kind of pulled my way back a little bit at the same time being very much influenced by what I consider so much insight and wisdom from Hillman. And there are just a few people like that for me.
So it
But
sounds, sorry, go on.
no, please go.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about individual freedom there as well. That you feel if you start to, sign up to the Jung Club or sign up to the Hillman Club, that there'll be this constraint there and the desire for your own individual freedom to find your own way is very strong. And could you say that's a daimonic aspect working its way in your life there?
Certainly is. I don't know exactly how to spell that out, but yes, there's something that is, and I get this idea from others. My agent, my literary agent, the one who helps me with get my books published, told me one day at lunch. He said to me, I'd like you to write the next book without any reference to Jung or Hillman. And when he said that, I was kind of shocked because it was like he made me aware that I'm doing this, that I'm too devoted to Jung and Hillman. I'm too close to them in my work, that I have to take my own power back into myself and not give too much away to them. And I was embarrassed to discover that. I didn't realize that to me that's a fault, that's a problem. So I have been working on that since. I haven't cut myself off from these two influences at all because they're so good and so strong. But I have I've really limited my references to their work. And I have really tried to speak, even when I teach or when I speak talking to you now today. I don't think you'll find too much Jung and Hillman in my speech to you. I may have if we talked 5 or 10 years ago, but I think I have taken much more of that back to myself. And I was uneasy with it. I remember, this is a difficult thing for me to say maybe, but I remember about, I don't know, it was at least 30 years ago, more than that, 35 years ago. A young person I knew who, good friend of mine, who knew Jung's work and Hillman and Jung and Hillman pretty well. And I remember she said to me one day, she said, your work is at least as important as Hillman's, and I think one day it might be more important. And I said to her, "You are crazy. That is never going to happen. And I don't believe that for a second." I said, "There's no way. These two figures have so much more knowledge than I will ever have. And they've been so original in their work. I'm really trying to do my best to be good students of their work and present it the best I can." And I often thought back in the years after that she was saying something important to me. Not literally, it's not about deciding literally what the case there is, but rather that I have to really own my own potency, my own power, and my own voice. And it's been difficult for me because maybe you had this experience, I don't know, but I had it. Being in a seminary for all those years, I learned this kind of a false humility, like you're supposed to be humble. You're not supposed to be taking such a, prominent place for yourself. So I think that works in me, and it's a real fault. But at any rate, it's important for me to, and I think everyone has this issue. You have to be yourself and champion yourself and love what you've accomplished in your life.
Um, I think with your work, like just in terms of how it's influenced my own life and my own work as well. I work as a therapist too. Um, you have a way of translating religious concepts. This is, you do a lot of things, but you are very good at translating religious concepts into a secular understanding. And one way you do that is through going back to the Greek word and then exploring around what that word means. And yeah, I understand that a lot of things maybe refer back to Hillman or to Jung, but I think yeah, your books for me personally are completely unique, and maybe even the way you bring Jung and Hillman together in your own way is unique, along with your religious training and religious background. With Dark Nights of the Soul, which is in a sense coming out of the ideas from John of the Cross. That's completely unique, according to me.
Yes, well, I certainly know that my influences are. For one thing about Hillman, this might be an interesting point. I don't mean this in relationship to myself now, but Hillman's comments on spirituality and the spiritual life are generally critical. He's very critical of the spiritual life and spirituality in general. He points out the difficulties and the problems with it primarily. He is rarely positive about it. At least there are some exceptions. I think that the very end, the last few pages of his book, Revisioning Psychology, is the best theological statement from him I know of. It's very brilliant and wonderful. But generally, he's critical in ways I think that show, first of all, his biases, and secondly, his misunderstanding. I don't think he understood the spiritual writings very well. On the other hand, I have a strong background in spiritual literature and ritual and practice. I mean, having been a monk all those years does have an impact. And so I have been able to be positive and to draw a great deal, I think, that's positive from the spiritual traditions. And I love putting them together. I translated the four Gospels, the four classical Gospels into, from Greek into English, and published those. And I love doing that. I love that work of translating the Greek and making commentaries on the translation as I went in my own way, different from most commentaries, more psychological than literary. And so in that regard, I feel very different both from Jung and Hillman. And I think that, to me, that's a contribution. And I'd like to do more of that, actually. I'd like to do more of it. I love doing that work. And bringing it into a book like Dark Nights of the Soul, too. There are things that I can say through Christianity and Christian theology and through the Gospels that I can't say in any other way. So I often refer to the Gospels for a comparison for my ideas, the way I may also refer to a Greek tragedy or to Greek language. But the Gospels have as much to teach us about the soul, about the psyche, as Greek tragedy does, as the Greek plays and poetry. Just the trouble is that the Gospels have been taken literally and not as poetry.
That's another thing that's helped me in my work quite a bit as well, is because what I find I'm often doing is translating, well, yeah, gospel stories or concepts from the Bible, but also from Rudolf Steiner and other spiritual teachers into a language that people can understand, because that's what we're doing, really, isn't it? We're trying to communicate. And I think your ability to do that in the books has really bridged a gap between religion as this sort of thing that's separated off from life and brought it right into the life, of the soul, what we're all experiencing. I think that's a real deed that you've done in your work there. Maybe if I could just ask another question, slightly adjacent to this, but in Dark Nights of the Soul, you mention again and again the power of the arts, and especially poetry is one you mention, of when we're going through difficult times in life to try to find the words for it. And it doesn't mean we have to become a poet or we have to become an artist, but to reimagine the experience we're going through and to bring it into the word. Could you just say a little bit more about that, if that's okay?
Yes, part of healing is to find language for what we are experiencing, good language. And you might start by trying to describe what your emotions are, but that's only the very first of many steps. So you might want to say, go into memory and say, what I'm going through now reminds me of when I was a child, and I wonder if it's connected to what happened when I was a child. If you don't take that literally, just looking for a cause, but rather actually going into the narrative of your life, as though your life narrative is an art form itself. Telling the story of your life is like, that's an art form. It's a novel. It's poetry in itself. I often tell, when I'm training psychotherapists, I'm often telling them, when you listen to stories from childhood, don't take them as looking for an explanation of what's happening in adulthood, but take them as a narrative, a story that is being told, and the story is what's valuable. And there's something about turning our experiences and our emotions into story, or better, into poetry, or even into painting them, or even making music of them, writing a song about your emotion. It's bringing it to a level where it is no longer so identified literally with your emotion, where you can relate to it and get insight into it, not through explanation, which is a weak approach, but rather through the poetic approach, where the insight comes without so much control, where you allow the muse to take you somewhere and you're actually speaking to yourself in language that is poetic, you get more from that. And so what you do is you loosen the weight of the emotion of the experience, and you're able to get some distance on it through the poetry of it. And I think that that really is, these are very important steps in the Dark Nights. That's what I try to write in the Dark Nights of the Soul. That's one of the things I say, is to try to find this way of moving the experience, the actual literal experience of the darkness, to move it into the poetic so that we get some distance, but without separating from it. And at the same time have some insight, because now we can look at it poetically and get insight the way you might from any story.
Yeah, that's that's wonderful. There's a quote actually I want to read from the Dark Nights of the Soul. You say here, a dark night of the soul need not be depressing. Today we tend to think of all emotional negativity as depression, and so we imagine ourselves sometimes to be depressed, when in fact it is only the world that is pressing down on us. You can be bright, thoughtful, creative, and imaginative during a dark night. You can use all your power to imagine your situation in your own way. You can reverse expectations and refuse to be literally defeated. And this is my favorite part. And none of this has to be a denial of your tragedy or the repression of your feelings. So it doesn't mean that the healing that's taking place or the work that you're doing to look at it in a new way or to transform it into words doesn't have to take away the tragedy. Because I noticed that about myself going through a difficult experience. It's like I don't actually want the tragedy to be taken away. There's a part of me that loves the pathos of it all. And that's such a real great way you've described it there.
Yes, I think there's something in what you just said that is rarely mentioned, but I think very important, that we are attached to our pain and to our suffering. And that's a good thing. You know, it's all right to do that. And that can be the gateway to further work with our suffering, which is not based in just literally suffering it, but rather to moving it somewhere and being creative with it.
I noticed before when you mentioned that, leaving home when you were just 13 and stepping outside the family, and that you still live with the regret of that. And there's a part of me that wants to go, oh, come on, Thomas, you've been a psychotherapist all these years and all this study, come on, surely you've got rid of that now. But it's not. Yeah, what would you say to someone who is thinking that way? It's not about getting rid of things. How do you respond to that?
You don't get rid of the experience or the memory of it or the feeling of it. What you might do is reorientate yourself toward it so that you aren't just in this place where you simply suffer it and let it bog down your life, because you're taking the suffering too literally, or that's the only thing you're taking from it. The painful experience has as a quality, suffering, weight, and so on. And you can keep that all your life if you want. And at the same time, move somewhere in your relationship to it. And when you do that, you don't get rid of the pain of it, but you're not oppressed by it either. Like, it's not the only thing going on. And you do it in such a way that it doesn't have that overwhelming limitation on yourself. You can do something with it. You can, like I said, when Hilma and I would talk to ourselves about things we've gone through, that were painful. And if we said we're still suffering them, we would just laugh at that we are still suffering it. We laugh heartily at the fact that we're still suffering this pain. But I remember us, both of us, saying so many times, we would just say, oh yes, I still feel that jealousy. I still feel that envy that I had before. I still feel the terrible depression. And we would just laugh that we still feel this. So it's an orientation toward it, but it doesn't take away the feeling.
Okay, and then it doesn't stop you from entering into life either.
No, it doesn't stop you from moving on and entering into life. In fact, it gives you the coloring of that sadness and the pain. That's an important coloring to have. If you don't have that as part of your being, of who you are, the way you present yourself to the world, if you don't present your pain as well as your happiness and success, then people are going to find this too light person. This person is too light and too healthy, too resolved. That's not good either. I think you can connect with people better when you still carry your suffering.
And is it not good? Do you say it's not good because it's not real? It's not true.
What is not true?
So if someone's just presenting their success and their happiness and their
Oh,
wonderful
yes.
life.
Yes, it's not true. Yeah, it's not complete. And so you sense the incompleteness of it. You might think to yourself, maybe even just without being too conscious of it, but you might feel, well, I don't know if I can trust this person. They really haven't lived. They're happy-go-lucky. That's not me.
Okay.
Not the life I've lived.
Okay. Yeah. Um, Maybe we could finish up. I'd like to ask you about what you're working on at the moment. And I think you mentioned um, a book related to Henry David Thoreau. And so if you'd like, I mean, all of your books and everything, I'll link below in the description so that people can find your work. But yeah, I'd love to hear. This is what's great about talking to an older man, if you don't mind me saying that, older man, that's okay. But is
Just
that
don't say ancient.
no, okay. Is to meet someone who's older, but who I I sense is still very much evolving. You just talked about how you're with your work moving more away from basing it on Hillman or Jung and finding your own voice, those sort of things, and then still working on. I mean, you've written over 30 books. I think you work hard, but this yeah, that you're still actually evolving and growing all the time. It's really inspiring. So yeah, anyway, I'd like to hear about this, what you're working on at the moment.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I think I began to get really interested in the transcendentalists, we call them, of New England, where I live. Um, in the 19th century, uh, a group of people gathered together pretty much. They moved around, but they gathered in Concord, Massachusetts, which is a small town, quite a small town outside of Boston, 16 miles outside of Boston. And began pretty much with Ralph Waldo Emerson, who trained to be a Unitarian minister. But when he finally graduated from Harvard University, or Harvard College, as they called it then, and became a minister, he realized that he didn't feel right doing these rituals and talking the way he did in his sermons. So he quit. He quit his job as being a minister at this church in Boston, and he became a traveling speaker. And he developed his own sort of a what would you say, non-allied, not untraditional approach. No church, but still he wanted to talk about the spiritual life. and things important to him. And one of his very first writings and sermons was called Nature. And I would recommend to anybody to read Nature. Beautiful, short essay, full of wisdom, insight, tremendous piece. And there was a young man, 14 years younger than Emerson, and his name was Henry David Thoreau. They say that he pronounced his name Thoreau, not Thoreau, as the way many of us have said it, but I can't get used to Thoreau as much, so I will say both probably. But anyway, Henry David Thoreau was a very rustic kind of man. He loved being in nature, in the woods, and being close to animal life. He loved that. And he built his own boats, and he traveled rivers, big rivers, in his own homemade boats. And he and his brother made a big trip on a long river trip that he wrote about afterwards. And one time, well, I wanted to say that Thoreau read Emerson's essay, Nature, and immediately got in touch with Emerson, and they became close friends. And Emerson, being the older one, tried to guide Thoreau. And Thoreau wanted to be a poet. That's what he thought he'd do with his life. But he discovered that he wasn't a good poet. So he didn't do poetry. He decided to write prose. And he had this inspiration when he was, when he was 27 or so, he was living in Concord in the town with his mother and sister. And he decided that he would spend some time living away from home, out in nature. So he built a little house, a little cabin. He called it a house, a little cabin, but it was only 10 feet by 15 feet. I don't know what in meters, what that is. I think it's like 5 by, I don't know what, 3. It was very, very small anyway. And he lived in this cabin that he built right on the shore, at the shore of a lake called Walden Pond. In New England, some of the lakes are very shallow and they call them ponds. I live on a pond. Here right now, I can see my pond. Even though it's a mile long, it's a pond. And because it's so shallow, I think I just read the other day, our lake is, average depth is 11 feet, which isn't very much. And so he lived there. And Emerson suggested that he keep a journal. So he kept journals while he was, well, for the rest of his life. And while he was at Walden Pond. And while he was there, he really discovered what he would be. He said when he went there, he didn't want to just be a naturalist and get to know nature. He wanted to find out how to live his own life. He says, I didn't want to come to the end of my life and feel that I had not really lived. That's why he went to Walden Pond. He was there for about 2 years plus some, 2.5 years maybe, at Walden Pond. And the pond where his cabin was only 2.5 miles from his home in Concord. Wasn't that far away. So he wasn't going off into Siberia, to get away from things. And his mother and sister would often bring him food, for dinner, bring him dinner. It was an easy walk for them. So he did this as kind of a ritual, not as a literal effort to get away from the world. I think that's a wonderful aspect of his work. And he wrote several books, and his most famous is called Walden. And it is based on obviously, on his 2 years plus living at Walden Pond and what he learned there. And it's considered one of the greatest books of an American writer. Very, very highly regarded. And many, many people read it and are inspired by it. He's also known somewhat outside of the United States. Yeats, for example, read Walden and was inspired by it. And many other European writers have read it and talked about it and said how important it was to them. So what I've done is I have read his journals, not all of them, the tremendous vast number of journal entries, but I read a great deal of his journals. I read some of his other books, books about, for example, apple trees or flowers and rivers, going down rivers. Walden, and also I read his letters. I read many of his letters. And what I've done is I've made this book that has 50 entries, and it is like a half a page quotation from Thoreau from one of these sources. Maybe it might be from a journal or from one of his books or letters. And I have half a page quote from him, and then 5 pages of my reaction or response to what he wrote. Not explaining it, but giving my reaction, what I would think about it for myself. What I think is valuable there, or what I like about it, or what I might disagree with it in it or something, but my response to it. And that's what this book that is finished and it's in production right now. And it's called The Cure at Walden Pond, because I think, Thoreau got a cure for his pain of wanting to know what to do with his life at Walden. And at the same time, I think that his ideas are a cure for us in our societies these days that have lost many of the insights that he gained at Walden. So I'm hoping that people might, through the dialogue between Thoreau and myself, that people might be able to gain some insight and some help in getting along in modern life by reading the two of us talking to each other.
That sounds great. I read Walden when I was about 19 because my girlfriend at the time was studying outdoor education in a town in Australia called Bendigo, and she was studying that. And part of their reading list was Walden, and it was really quite deeply impressed me, had a deep impression on me at the time. And so, maybe, could you just very briefly an example of what is one of the cures, or what is an aspect of the cure for the modern malaise that he's suggesting, or that could relate to us today?
Oh, that's good. A good question. I'm going to have to be ready for that one when this book comes out. Well, there's so many. Here, let me just make a couple points. I'll try to be very brief. He's a really good writer, and he has a voice and a style of writing like no one else that I know of. And he has such insights that to me are fresh. They're like the way he puts them, and the insight itself is fresh. And so, for example, one of the things he says over and over again, he's interested in not being too attached to wealth and money. And not that he thinks you shouldn't make money. He made money by a number of things. He surveyed land, and he made a good income that way. And his family had a pencil making business, so they made pencils. And Thoreau himself was very good at the technology of making pencils. So he was not against making money and having a craft to do that. but he felt it was really more, he says over and over again, I much prefer picking berries to working all day long at a job and making money. I mean, that's a paraphrase, but that's one of the things he would say. So one of the things to learn from reading Thoreau is to reset your attitude toward making money and toward work that satisfies you and gives what you need to make your life meaningful. And he says this in many, many different ways. And he gives an example of how he does it, which is pretty interesting. Another thing, I'm going to have to add another example. Another example is that he was a musician and he played the flute. He liked to play for fish. Fish were an important part of his life. He'd go to the pond and the fish would come up to the edge of the pond and he would play his flute for them. It was like Orpheus in the Greek mythology, playing his instrument for the animals. And he trained animals to come to visit him and eat out of his hand, things like that. But music was important to him. But he said, and I think this is very interesting. He said that for him, he was more pleased by the music of dogs barking at night when he was going to sleep, hearing dogs barking, or by the music of telephone wires, telegraph wires blowing in the wind, than going to a performance of an orchestra. He thought the music that he found both in nature and just accidentally being sounded in things like wires going from pole to pole, that kind of accidental music was so important to be able to pay attention to it. I think that's a great lesson in just having an aesthetic approach to ordinary life, to be able to see the beauty and the pleasure, aesthetic pleasure you can have in the most ordinary things that ordinarily are not considered aesthetic at all.
Oh, that's beautiful. That reminds me of another one of your books, The Re-Enchantment of Everyday Life, which is also, which is in a sense what you're talking about there. That's beautiful. That's a really nice place, I think, to end our conversation. But Thomas, thank you very much for agreeing to come on today. It's been a real pleasure for me to get to speak with you, and I'm sure for our viewers and listeners as well. So thank you. I'll have all your links and everything for your books and your work down below in the description so that people can find you. But other than that, thank you very much for joining me today.
If I may say thank you to you too, because it's been a great pleasure that you know this work that I'm doing very well, and you have great sensitivity to it. We have similar background in some ways. And so it has been a real delight. And I appreciate the way you're able to talk and listen. Not everybody can listen. You listen well. And I think we were able to have a real dialogue. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's I was wondering how it was going to go, and I have to say I was a little bit nervous speaking with you, but it was a real conversation, so I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you. And if I can just remind our viewers and listeners that if you'd like to support the podcast to continue, the links for all of that down below will be down below as well, with Substack and other places where you can support this channel. But thank you very much, Thomas, and maybe look forward to speaking to you again, and all the best with your work.
Same to you. All the best with your work. It's such good work to be doing. It's, we're both doing the work of the priest.
Yeah. That's right.
Not in the way we thought, but we are. And so it's wonderful to have this dialogue with you, and I hope we can do it again.
I hope so too, very much. Thanks very much, Thomas. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.